The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Sergeant Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red ceremonial jacket for the 100th time that day. His black bearskin hat sat perfectly straight, and his polished boots reflected the golden light streaming through the palace gates. Thomas had been a royal guard for 12 years, and in all that time, he had mastered the art of standing completely still for hours on end. The tourists began arriving early that morning, their cameras clicking and flashing as they tried to capture the perfect photo with the stoic guards. Thomas had seen it all before. People making silly faces, trying to make him laugh, waving frantically in front of his face. He remained unmoved, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his expression as solid as the stone walls behind him. Around mid-morning, a family approached the guard post. The parents were busy taking photos of the impressive palace architecture, while their 4-year-old daughter wandered closer to where Thomas stood. The little girl had curly blonde hair tied up in tiny pigtails and wore a bright pink dress with white shoes that squeaked with every step she took. She stopped directly in front of Thomas and tilted her head to one side, studying his face with the intense curiosity that only children possess. Her big blue eyes moved from his hat to his jacket buttons, then to his face again. Thomas could feel her staring, but he maintained his professional composure, looking straight ahead as he had been trained to do. The little girl took a step closer and whispered, "Are you a real person?" Her voice was so soft that only Thomas could hear her. She waited patiently for an answer, rocking back and forth on her squeaky shoes. When no response came, she tried again, this time a little louder. "Mister, are you okay? You look very tired." Thomas felt something stir inside his chest, but he kept his face neutral. The child's genuine concern was unlike anything he experienced from the usual tourists who saw him as nothing more than a living statue for their entertainment. This little girl seemed to actually care about his well-being. The girl's mother noticed her daughter had wandered off and quickly approached. "Emma, come back here. Don't bother the nice guard," she called out, reaching for her daughter's hand. But Emma wasn't ready to leave just yet. She looked up at her mother and then back at Thomas. "Mommy, I think he might be sad. He hasn't smiled once," Emma said with the kind of innocent honesty that only children can deliver. She then did something that caught Thomas completely off guard. The little girl reached into her small backpack and pulled out a half-eaten chocolate chip cookie, wrapped in a napkin. She carefully unwrapped the cookie and held it up toward Thomas. "Here, this always makes me feel better when I'm sad. My mommy made it this morning and it has extra chocolate chips because those are the best kind." She stood on her tiptoes, stretching her arm as high as she could reach, trying to offer the cookie to the tall guard. Thomas could smell the sweet aroma of the homemade cookie. His stomach rumbled quietly, reminding him that he had skipped breakfast that morning. But more than the hunger, it was the pure kindness in this gesture that touched something deep inside him. No adult had ever offered him anything during his duty. They saw the uniform, the ceremony, the tradition, but they rarely saw the person underneath. The little girl's mother was now standing beside her daughter, looking embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Thomas, though she knew he couldn't respond. "Emma, the guard can't eat while he's working. Come on, let's go find Daddy." But Emma wasn't giving up that easily. She lowered the cookie but didn't put it away. Instead, she sat down cross-legged on the ground right in front of Thomas, carefully placing the cookie on the napkin beside her. "I'll just wait here until you're ready to eat." She announced matter-of-factly. Thomas watched from the corner of his eye as this determined little girl settled in for what she clearly thought would be a long wait. Her mother tried to coax her away, but Emma had made up her mind. She was going to make sure this sad guard got his cookie, even if it took all day. Other tourists began to notice the scene unfolding. Some smiled at the sweet interaction, while others took photos of the little girl sitting patiently in front of the immovable guard. Thomas felt the weight of all those watching eyes, but somehow the presence of this caring child made his duty feel different, more meaningful. As the minutes ticked by, Emma began to hum a soft tune, occasionally looking up at Thomas to check if he was ready for his cookie yet. Her unwavering faith that he would eventually accept her gift created a warmth in Thomas's chest that he hadn't felt in years. 20 minutes had passed, and Emma was still sitting patiently on the ground, occasionally glancing up at Thomas with hopeful eyes. Her mother had given up trying to move her and instead stood nearby, checking her phone and shaking, her head with a mixture of embarrassment and amusement at her daughter's stubborn kindness. Thomas was fighting an internal battle he had never experienced before in his years of service. Every fiber of his training told him to remain perfectly still, to ignore the distractions, to maintain the dignity of his position. But this little girl's simple act of compassion was slowly melting the ice around his heart. A fellow guard, Corporal James Wright, was stationed at the next post about 30 feet away. James had been watching the situation unfold with growing curiosity. During his 15 years of service, he had seen countless attempts to break their concentration, but nothing quite like this. The genuine sweetness of the child's gesture was affecting him too, and he found himself fighting back a smile. Emma suddenly stood up and brushed off her pink dress. She picked up her cookie and walked over to where James was standing. Thomas watched nervously as she approached his colleague, wondering what she would do next. "Excuse me, Mr. Guard," Emma said politely, looking up at James with the same earnest expression she had given Thomas. "Your friend over there looks very hungry, and I have this cookie for him. But I think he might be too shy to take it. Could you please tell him it's okay? My mommy says sharing food is how we show people we care about them." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. The innocence and pure intention behind her words hit him harder than any tourist's antics ever had. He wanted desperately to break protocol, to kneel down and explain to this sweet child that they appreciated her kindness more than she could ever know. Instead, James did something subtle but significant. Without moving his head or changing his expression, he slowly and deliberately blinked twice in the direction of Thomas. It was a small signal they had developed over the years, usually used to communicate during long shifts, but this time it carried a different message entirely. Thomas caught the signal and understood immediately. James was telling him that sometimes the rules needed to bend for moments of pure human connection. Sometimes the heart needed to overrule the handbook. Emma returned to her spot in front of Thomas, cookie still in hand. She had noticed the brief exchange between the guards, though she didn't understand what it meant. What she did understand was that these men were real people underneath their fancy uniforms, people who might be hungry or lonely or in need of a friend. "I know you can hear me," she whispered, leaning closer to Thomas. "My grandpa was in the army, and he told me that soldiers are very brave, but sometimes they get scared too. He said that when someone offers you something nice, it's okay to say thank you, even if you're supposed to be tough." The wisdom in her words, filtered through the innocent voice of a 4-year-old, struck Thomas like lightning. This child somehow understood something that most adults missed entirely. Behind the ceremony and tradition, they were still human beings deserving of kindness and connection. A small crowd had gathered now, all watching the interaction between the persistent little girl and the stone-faced guard. Unlike the usual gawking tourists, these observers seemed genuinely moved by what they were witnessing. Some had tears in their eyes, recognizing the beautiful simplicity of a child's compassion, meeting the rigid requirements of duty. Emma's father finally appeared, having finished his tour of the palace gardens. He approached his wife and daughter, taking in the scene with confusion. "What's going on here?" he asked quietly. "Our daughter has decided that Guard needs a cookie, and she's not leaving until he takes it," his wife explained, her voice filled with both pride and exasperation. Emma's father knelt down beside his daughter. "Sweetheart, the guard can't eat while he's working. It's part of his job to stand very still." Emma looked at her father with the kind of logic that only children possess. "But Daddy, everybody needs to eat, and everybody needs to know that someone cares about them. That's what you taught me." Her father found himself without a response to such pure reasoning. He looked up at Thomas, and for just a moment their eyes met. In that brief connection, Thomas saw understanding and respect from one father to another, recognizing the beautiful heart his daughter possessed. The situation was becoming more touching by the minute, and Thomas could feel his resolve weakening with each passing second. The warmth spreading through his chest was unfamiliar but wonderful, reminding him why he had chosen to serve in the first place, to protect and honor the good in the world. And this little girl represented the very best of humanity. The afternoon sun was climbing higher, and Emma had been maintaining her vigil for nearly an hour. She had carefully rewrapped her cookie 3 times to keep it fresh, each time explaining to Thomas that cookies taste better when they're protected from the wind. Her dedication was becoming legendary among the growing crowd of onlookers. Captain Robert Hayes, the senior officer in charge of the guard rotation, had been alerted to the unusual situation by several tourists who had approached the information desk. As he walked across the courtyard to assess what was happening, he expected to find the typical tourist disruption that required firm but polite intervention. What he found instead stopped him in his tracks. There, sitting cross-legged in front of one of his most disciplined guards, was a little girl in a pink dress, holding a wrapped cookie and speaking in gentle, encouraging tones to Sergeant Mitchell. The scene was so unexpectedly touching that Captain Hayes felt his own carefully maintained composure waver. He had been leading Royal Guards for over 20 years, and in all that time, he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The handbook covered dealing with unruly tourists, protesters, and even medical emergencies, but nowhere did it address what to do when a child's pure kindness threatened to melt the hearts of his most stoic soldiers. Emma noticed the approach of the tall officer with the additional stripes and medals on his uniform. She stood up respectfully, still clutching her cookie, and looked up at Captain Hayes with curious eyes. "Are you the boss of all the guards?" she asked with the straightforward honesty that adults often found both charming and intimidating. Captain Hayes cleared his throat, unsure how to respond while maintaining his authority. "I am Captain Hayes, yes. I'm in charge of making sure all the guards do their jobs properly." Emma nodded seriously as if she understood the weight of his responsibilities. "Well then, you should know that this guard hasn't eaten anything all morning. That's not very healthy. My teacher says we need to eat good food to have energy to do our jobs well." The captain found himself in the peculiar position of being lectured about proper nutrition by a preschooler, and he was struggling to maintain his stern expression. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, with people pulling out their phones to record what was becoming a truly extraordinary moment. "The guards eat during their break time," Captain Hayes explained gently. "They have to stand very still while they're on duty." Emma considered this information carefully, her small face scrunched up in concentration. But what if someone gets hungry before break time? What if their tummy starts making noise and distracts them from being a good guard? The logic was so simple and yet so profound that Captain Hayes found himself momentarily speechless. This child had managed to identify a basic human need that their rigid protocols had never adequately addressed. Thomas was watching this conversation unfold with a mixture of terror and hope. He had never seen his commanding officer engaged in such a discussion, and he wasn't sure whether Emma's questions would result in trouble for him or understanding for all of them. Emma suddenly had what she clearly considered to be a brilliant idea. Her face lit up with excitement as she turned back to Thomas, then to Captain Hayes, then to the crowd that had gathered. "I know what we can do," she announced proudly. "What if we all wait very quietly until it's his break time and then we can give him the cookie? That way he follows the rules, but he still gets to know that people care about him." The suggestion was so reasonable and kind that several people in the crowd began to nod in agreement. Someone called out, "When is the guards' break?" Others began to murmur about how they wouldn't mind waiting to see this sweet story reach its conclusion. Captain Hayes realized that this situation had evolved far beyond a simple protocol issue. Word was spreading through social media, with people posting photos and videos of Emma's patient vigil. The story was capturing hearts around the world, and the palace was receiving calls from news stations wanting to cover the cookie guard story. But more than the public attention, what struck Captain Hayes was the genuine human connection that was happening right in front of him. He watched as Emma carefully rewrapped her cookie again, explaining to Thomas that she had brought extra napkins to keep it extra fresh for when he was ready. The other guards on duty were also affected by what they were witnessing. Word had spread among them about the little girl who refused to give up on showing kindness to one of their own. Several had managed discreet glances at the scene during their shifts, and each one felt something stirring in their hearts that they hadn't experienced in years of service. James, still at his post nearby, was fighting back tears as he watched Emma's unwavering determination to show care for his friend and colleague. The purity of her intention, the complete absence of any ulterior motive beyond simple human kindness, was more powerful than any ceremony or tradition he had ever been part of. Captain Hayes made a decision that would later be discussed in guardhouses across the country. He looked at his watch, then at Emma, then at the expectant crowd that had gathered to witness this extraordinary display of patience and love. Captain Hayes knelt down to Emma's eye level, his medals catching the afternoon sunlight. The gesture immediately caught the attention of everyone present, including Thomas, who had never seen his commanding officer break protocol in such a public way. "Emma," Captain Hayes said softly, his voice carrying both authority and genuine warmth, "you have shown more patience and kindness today than most people show in a lifetime. I think we can arrange something special for you and Sergeant Mitchell." Emma's eyes widened with excitement, but she maintained her polite composure. "Does that mean he can have his cookie now?" The captain smiled, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself during duty hours in longer than he could remember. "It means that sometimes the most important rule of all is treating each other with kindness, and you've reminded us all of that today." He stood up and addressed the crowd that had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing something truly special today. This young lady has shown us that behind every uniform is a person deserving of care and respect. In recognition of her extraordinary patience and kindness, we're going to do something a little different." Thomas felt his heart racing as Captain Hayes approached him. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he trusted his commanding officer completely. The crowd fell silent, everyone sensing that they were about to witness something memorable. "Sergeant Mitchell," Captain Hayes said in his official voice, "you are hereby granted a special commendation break to accept a gift from a distinguished visitor to the palace." The words hung in the air for a moment as everyone processed what had just happened. Thomas looked at his captain with surprise and gratitude, then slowly and deliberately relaxed his posture for the first time in hours. Emma gasped with delight as she watched Thomas's transformation from statue to human being. She had been so patient, so convinced that he was a real person underneath that formal exterior, and now she was finally going to meet him properly. Thomas knelt down to Emma's level, his movements careful and dignified even in this moment of unprecedented flexibility. "Hello, Emma," he said, his voice slightly hoarse from hours of silence. "I believe you have something for me." The little girl's face broke into the brightest smile anyone in the crowd had ever seen. She carefully unwrapped her cookie one final time and held it out to Thomas with both hands, as if she were presenting him with the most precious treasure in the world. "I made sure to keep it fresh for you," she said proudly. "And I saved you the best piece. It has 3 chocolate chips right in the middle." Thomas accepted the cookie with the same ceremony he would use to receive a medal from royalty. "This is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received during my service," he said sincerely. "Thank you for waiting so patiently for me." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause as Thomas took a bite of the cookie. His face lit up with genuine appreciation as he tasted the homemade sweetness. "This is absolutely delicious," he told Emma. "Your mother is an excellent baker." Emma beamed with pride, and then surprised everyone by stepping forward and giving Thomas a gentle hug around his knees. "I knew you were a nice person," she whispered. "I could tell by your eyes." The moment was so pure and beautiful that many people in the crowd were openly crying. Phones were recording, but somehow the technology felt secondary to the human connection they were all witnessing. This was the kind of moment that restored faith in the goodness of people. Thomas returned Emma's hug with one arm, while carefully holding the precious cookie with his other hand. In 12 years of service, he had been thanked by dignitaries, acknowledged by superiors, and respected by colleagues, but none of those moments had touched his heart the way this simple interaction with a caring child had. Captain Hayes watched the scene with deep satisfaction. He had made the right decision, even if it meant bending the rules. Sometimes leadership meant recognizing when human connection was more important than rigid protocol. The positive attention this moment would bring to the guards would far outweigh any concerns about maintaining absolute discipline. James, still at his post but now openly smiling, felt a renewed sense of pride in his service. Emma had reminded them all that their job was not just about ceremony and tradition, it was about being worthy of the trust and affection that good people like her placed in them. Emma's parents approached cautiously, amazed by what their daughter had accomplished. They had expected to spend a few minutes taking tourist photos and had instead become part of a story that would be talked about for years to come. "Thank you for being so kind to our daughter," Emma's mother said to both Thomas and Captain Hayes. "She has such a big heart, and sometimes we worry that the world might not appreciate it." Thomas stood up, still holding the remaining piece of his cookie. "Ma'am, your daughter has given me a gift that I will treasure forever. She has reminded me why I chose this service in the first place, to protect the goodness in the world, and she represents the very best of that goodness. Word of Emma's cookie mission spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By evening, videos of the interaction had been shared millions of times across social media platforms. News stations from around the world were requesting interviews, and the palace's phone lines were buzzing with calls from reporters wanting to know more about the little girl who melted a guard's heart. But the real impact was being felt much closer to home. In guardhouses across the city, off-duty soldiers were watching the videos on their phones and feeling something they hadn't experienced in years: a renewed connection to the human side of their service. Corporal Sarah Williams, who worked the evening shift, arrived at the palace that night to find her colleagues talking about nothing else. "You should have seen it, Sarah," James told her during the shift change. "This little girl sat there for over an hour, just waiting patiently with a cookie because she thought Thomas looked sad. She didn't want anything from him, no photos, no attention, just wanted to make sure he knew someone cared." Sarah had been a royal guard for 8 years, and like all her colleagues, she had learned to maintain emotional distance from the public. It was a necessary skill for managing the constant attention, the endless requests for photos, and the occasional difficult tourist. But Emma's story was different. It reminded her why she had been drawn to service in the first place. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the palace to find a small memorial of sorts at his usual post. Someone had left a plate of homemade cookies with a note that read, "For all the guards, thank you for your service. From Emma's story, we learned that you're real people with real hearts." More gifts appeared throughout the day: flowers, chocolates, handwritten thank you notes, and dozens more cookies. Captain Hayes realized they needed to address this unprecedented outpouring of public affection. He called a special meeting with all the guards to discuss how to handle the situation professionally while still honoring the spirit of what Emma had started. "What happened yesterday was extraordinary," he told the assembled guards. "That little girl reminded us all of something important, that our service is ultimately about people, and people deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. The public's response shows that they've been waiting for permission to see us as human beings, not just tourist attractions." The captain paused, looking around at faces that showed a mix of pride, emotion, and uncertainty. "We're going to make some changes to our protocols. Small changes, but important ones. We'll still maintain the dignity and discipline that our service requires. But we'll also remember that a moment of human connection doesn't diminish our professionalism. It enhances it." These changes would prove to be revolutionary in small but meaningful ways. Guards would now be permitted brief, respectful interactions with children who approached them with genuine curiosity or kindness. They could acknowledge gifts with a nod of thanks, even if they couldn't accept them during duty hours. Most importantly, they were encouraged to remember that their stoic exterior should never completely hide their human hearts. Emma, meanwhile, had become something of a local celebrity, though she didn't fully understand what all the fuss was about. To her, she had simply shared a cookie with someone who looked like he needed a friend. When reporters asked her what she thought about all the attention her story was receiving, she gave the kind of answer that only a 4-year-old could provide. "I think everyone should share cookies," she said matter-of-factly, "and everyone should have friends. The guard man was very nice, and I'm glad he liked my cookie. Maybe next time I'll bring enough for all of them." Her innocent suggestion sparked another wave of public response. A local bakery announced they would provide fresh cookies for the guards every week. A children's choir offered to perform for the guards during their lunch break. Schools organized field trips specifically to teach children about showing respect and kindness to public servants. But perhaps the most significant change was in Thomas himself. The simple act of accepting Emma's cookie had opened something in his heart that had been closed for too long. He began to see his role differently, not just as a silent sentinel, but as a guardian of the values that Emma represented: kindness, patience, and the belief that every person deserved to be treated with care. During his off-duty hours, Thomas started volunteering at a local community center, reading to children and teaching them about service and civic duty. He would often tell Emma's story, explaining how one little girl's determination to show kindness had changed not just his day, but his entire perspective on life. The ripple effects continued to spread. Other guards began sharing their own stories of meaningful interactions with the public. James started a mentorship program for young people interested in military service. Sarah began writing a blog about the human side of ceremonial duty, which attracted readers from around the world who were hungry for stories of genuine human connection. Emma's parents were amazed by the impact their daughter's simple act of kindness had created. They had always known she had a special heart, but seeing how her compassion had touched so many people reminded them of the power that each person holds to make the world a little better. 3 months after the cookie incident, the palace had transformed into something none of the guards could have imagined. What had once been a place where tourists came primarily for photos and sightseeing had become a destination for people seeking authentic human connection and inspiration. Emma had returned to visit several times, always bringing homemade treats to share with the guards. Each visit created new moments of joy that reminded everyone why her original gesture had been so powerful. She had developed genuine friendships with Thomas, James, and several other guards, who looked forward to her visits like rays of sunshine breaking through their formal duties. On this particular morning, Emma arrived with her grandmother, a gentle woman in her 70s who had been deeply moved by her granddaughter's story. She carried a basket filled with cookies, but these were different. Each one had been decorated with tiny royal crowns made of icing, a tribute to the guards who had embraced Emma's message of kindness. "Grandma helped me make these special," Emma announced proudly as she approached Thomas at his post. She said that people who protect important places deserve cookies that are just as special. Thomas, now permitted to acknowledge such gifts during his duty, smiled warmly and nodded his thanks. The protocols had indeed changed since that memorable day, allowing for brief, respectful interactions that honored both the dignity of their service and their humanity. But Emma had brought more than cookies on this visit. She had also brought a letter, carefully written in the large, uneven letters of a 4-year-old who was just learning to write. With her grandmother's help, she had crafted a message that would become legendary among the guards. "Dear Mr. Thomas and all the guard friends," she had written, "thank you for being so nice to me. I learned that being patient is good and that sharing makes everyone happy. My teacher says you are heroes because you keep people safe. I think you are heroes because you have kind hearts. Love, Emma." The letter was accompanied by a drawing that Emma had made, a picture of herself standing next to a tall figure in a red coat and black hat, both of them smiling and holding a large cookie between them. The artwork was proudly displayed in the guard station, where it served as a daily reminder of the impact that simple kindness could have. Captain Hayes had been tracking the long-term effects of what the media had dubbed the cookie protocol. Tourist satisfaction scores had increased dramatically. Complaints about the guards being unfriendly or intimidating had dropped to nearly zero. More importantly, morale among the guards themselves had never been higher. The changes had attracted attention from military units around the world. Delegations came to study how the palace guards had managed to maintain their ceremonial dignity while becoming more accessible to the public. The balance they had achieved was seen as a model for other institutions struggling to connect with the communities they served. Thomas had been promoted to senior sergeant, partly in recognition of his exemplary handling of the situation with Emma, but mostly because of the positive leadership he had shown in embracing the new approach to their duties. He now trained new guards not just in proper stance and procedure, but in the art of maintaining professionalism while remaining human. "Remember," he would tell the new recruits, "we serve the people, and that service is most meaningful when we never forget that we are people too." A child taught me that lesson, and it changed everything about how I approached this job. The story had also inspired similar changes in other institutions. Police departments began implementing community connection programs. Hospital security guards started programs to interact more warmly with nervous patients. Even corporate security firms began training their staff to balance authority with approachability. Emma's impact extended beyond the immediate circle of the guards she had befriended. Schools across the country began using her story as part of their character education programs, teaching children about persistence, kindness, and the courage to reach out to others even when they seemed distant or unapproachable. A children's book was written about Emma's adventure, with proceeds going to charities that supported veterans and active military families. The book became a bestseller, introducing her message of kindness and patience to children around the world. Emma was thrilled to see her story in print, though she was most excited about the fact that the book had pictures of her cookies in it. Local businesses near the palace began offering Emma's special cookies decorated with royal themes and with a portion of the proceeds going to support programs for military families. The initiative became so popular that it spread to other cities, creating a network of businesses committed to honoring both military service and childhood compassion. The guards themselves had become minor celebrities, but in the best possible way. They were recognized not just for their ceremonial role, but for their willingness to embrace change and growth. They received invitations to speak at schools, participate in community events, and share their experiences with other service members. James had started a pen pal program between the guards and children at local schools. Through letters and occasional visits, the guards shared stories about their work, their training, and their commitment to service, while the children shared their dreams, their drawings, and their own acts of kindness in their communities. 1 year after the cookie incident, the palace organized a special ceremony to commemorate what had become known as Kindness Day. Emma, now 5 years old and even more confident in her interactions with the guards, was invited as the guest of honor. She wore a new pink dress for the occasion, with white shoes that squeaked just like her old ones. The ceremony took place in the same courtyard where she had first sat patiently with her cookie. Hundreds of people had gathered, not just tourists, but families from the local community, school children, veterans, and citizens who had been inspired by Emma's story to perform their own acts of kindness throughout the year. Captain Hayes, now promoted to Major Hayes, stood at a podium decorated with flowers and ribbons. Behind him, a bronze plaque had been installed on the wall, featuring an engraving of a small girl offering a cookie to a tall guard. The inscription read, "In recognition that the smallest acts of kindness can create the greatest changes in the world." 1 year ago, Major Hayes addressed the crowd. "A little girl taught us that the most important protocols are written not in handbooks but in the human heart. Emma showed us that patience, kindness, and genuine care for others are not signs of weakness in those who serve. They are our greatest strengths." Emma sat in the front row with her family, occasionally waving at Thomas and James, who stood at attention nearby. She didn't fully understand all the grown-up words being spoken, but she could feel the happiness and gratitude in the air around her. The ceremony included presentations of several new initiatives that had grown from Emma's original act of kindness. The palace community garden had been established, where guards and local families worked together to grow vegetables that were donated to food banks. The Letters of Thanks program collected notes from school children around the world to guards and service members everywhere. Perhaps most significantly, the Emma's Cookie Fund had been established to provide support for military families dealing with hardship. The fund, started with donations from people moved by Emma's story, had already helped dozens of families with emergency expenses, educational costs, and other needs. When it came time for Emma to speak, she approached the microphone with the same fearless confidence she had shown when approaching Thomas a year earlier. Someone had to lower the microphone to her height, which made the crowd chuckle with affection. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice clear and sweet. "I want to say thank you to all the guard friends for being so nice to me. I learned that when you share cookies, you make friends. And when you make friends, everyone feels happier." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces watching her with rapt attention. "My mom says that what I did was special. But I think everyone does special things every day. Like when Mrs. Johnson next door brings soup when someone is sick, or when my teacher helps kids who are sad, or when the guards keep us all safe." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word from this remarkable little girl, who had somehow managed to articulate profound truths with the simplicity that only children possess. "I think we should all share more cookies," Emma concluded with a bright smile. "And we should remember that everyone needs friends, even grown-ups who look very serious." The applause was thunderous, but what moved people most was the sight of several guards wiping tears from their eyes as they maintained their positions. These men and women, trained to show no emotion during duty, were openly affected by the pure wisdom of this child who had changed their lives forever. As the ceremony concluded, Emma was presented with a special medal, a small bronze cookie with a crown on top suspended from a pink ribbon. "This is to thank you for teaching us that the greatest service comes from the heart," Major Hayes told her as he placed the medal around her neck. But Emma had one more surprise for everyone. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a container filled with fresh cookies. "I brought enough for everyone today," she announced. "Because sharing is more fun when everyone gets some." The formal ceremony dissolved into something much more beautiful, a community celebration where guards, dignitaries, families, and children all shared cookies together in the palace courtyard. The rigid lines between authority and civilian, adult and child, protocol and humanity, all melted away in the warmth of shared sweetness and genuine connection. Thomas knelt down beside Emma as she distributed cookies to anyone who wanted one. "You know," he said quietly, "that first day when you offered me your cookie, I thought you were just a persistent little girl. I never imagined that you were actually a teacher in disguise." Emma giggled at the idea of being a teacher. "I'm not a teacher, Mr. Thomas. I just think people should be nice to each other. It's not very hard to do." As the sun set over the palace that evening, the guards took their positions for the night shift. But something fundamental had changed in that place forever. The wall still stood strong. The ceremonies still maintained their dignity and the traditions still commanded respect. But now, woven through all of that formal structure, was something even more powerful. The understanding that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from opening your heart to the connections that make us all human. Emma's story had become more than just a heartwarming tale about a girl and her cookie. It had become a reminder that in a world that often seems divided and distant, the simplest acts of kindness can bridge any gap, melt any barrier, and create the kind of change that no amount of force or authority ever could. Years later, when new guards joined the service, they would hear Emma's story as part of their training. They would learn that wearing the uniform was an honor, but remembering their humanity while wearing it was their greatest duty. And somewhere in the city, a little girl who had once sat patiently in a courtyard with a chocolate chip cookie continued to grow up, carrying with her the knowledge that she had helped make the world a little bit kinder, one cookie at a time. The bronze plaque on the palace wall would weather many seasons, but the lesson it commemorated would endure forever. That the most profound changes often begin with the smallest gestures, offered by the purest hearts to those who need them most.